Today we celebrate the solemnity of Saints Peter and Saint Paul, and these two individuals are seen as the pillars of the church. So it is through these two individuals, more so than all the others, that Christianity was not only established but spread to many, many places. So of course with Saint Peter, he is the rock on which the church is built, as we heard in today's gospel reading. And so he's the vicar of Christ, the representative of Christ here on earth. So when there are disputes in the church, it's the Pope who has the final say. And of course, he can exercise this authority, this ability through the gift of infallibility which has been given to him, which has been given to the church also for the benefit of the church. So we have this great security in the Catholic Church that we will be kept on the straight and narrow, which is not to say that popes cannot or have not made mistakes. They have, but when it comes to the official teachings of the church, there's this clear consistency over a 2,000-year period. When we think of St. Paul, we often think of him as a great missionary, and he was. But it's important to keep in mind that the other apostles were also missionary. They went to different places, St. Thomas, for example, to India. So they established the churches in different places, but with St. Paul, he went to many places, and not only that, he corresponded with them. And it's by means of these correspondence, his letters, that we get the first writings or written accounts of Christianity. So when we look at the New Testament, the Gospels come first, but in reality, the letters were written first, in particular, the letters of St. Paul. But what I wanted to draw your attention to is that when we consider St. Peter and St. Paul, from a human perspective, they are the two most unlikely candidates to be pillars of the church. So when we think of St. Peter, he was just a simple fisherman. He probably had some knowledge of the scripture, yes, but he wasn't that well educated. When it comes to St. Paul, he was an ardent persecutor of the church, not someone that you would want to be kind of an influential position in the church. The other thing about St. Peter is that he was very impetuous. He would just say things or do things without thinking about it. For example, recall when he sees Christ walking on the water and he says, "Lord, if it's really you, bid me come to you on the water." So he's very impetuous. We see this again and again. So ideally, not someone you want running the church. But the good thing about St. Peter is that he learned to be humble by his mistakes. He promises or swears that he will lay down his life for Christ and ends up denying him 3 times. So by means of his mistakes, he learns humility. And when we are humble, we're more open to considering the reality that we might be wrong, that it's good to listen to other people's opinions or advice. And we see St. Paul in the Acts of the Apostles actually correcting St. Peter when he sided with the circumcision party. So St. Paul was very well educated in the scriptures, very zealous for the ways of the Jewish tradition, for the Jewish faith, and he saw Christianity as a threat to true Judaism until he is converted by Christ himself. Because of his great knowledge of scripture and also of the Jewish traditions, he was an ideal person to try to convince the Jewish people to accept Christianity. And we see some of this in his writings. But very quickly, the Jewish people, St. Paul just encounters so much opposition that he kind of starts to focus more on the Gentiles, and so becomes an apostle to the Gentiles, sent by Christ himself. So he does a lot to spread Christianity. So both of them, as I mentioned in many ways, are not ideal candidates. And sometimes when we celebrate the feast of saints such as St. Peter and St. Paul, we marvel at the great things that these saints have done. But spiritual authors tell us that we should not marvel at the great things that saints have done. Rather, we should marvel at what God has done through such individuals as St. Peter and St. Paul. And I think the takeaway message for all of us is that God can do great things through us. We need to be humble. We need to be willing to admit that we don't know everything, that we can be wrong. St. Paul was wrong. St. Peter was wrong. We can make mistakes too. And so we shouldn't trust in ourselves. We should submit to the authority of the church, to the authority of Christ. But in our humbleness, it's only when we are truly humble that we can truly spread the love of God and the message of salvation to everyone around us. Just a brief reminder, this coming Friday, or this Friday, will be the first Friday of the month, July 1st. And so once again, we will have an all-night vigil of adoration.